Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Been another really interesting week. Lots of things happening in Scotland and outside of Scotland that could affect us and can and will affect us. Lots to talk about today. So firstly, just to say, our dear friend Lloyd's still unable to be with us this week, but don't worry, we've got the rest of the crew here, starting with our favourite lawyer up there in Clackmannan. Eva, how are you?
Hi Roddy, yeah, good. As you've just said, a busy week, politically as well as otherwise. So yeah, much to talk about. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And up there in the city of Discovery, we have Mr. Petrie.
Hi Roddy, how are you all doing?
Doing great, mate. You?
Not too bad. We've got Megan in respite for until Wednesday now, trying to recover from a sore neck.
Oh dear. Well, it's fun that you having the brass neck, isn't that right?
Been told that many times.
Exactly. And over there in Brussels, it's Mr. Boswell. How are you?
Yeah, all good in Brussels. It's going dark over here now. I'm an hour ahead, even a wee bit further south, and it's it's not great. At least I'm starting to come to work in the sunshine and going home in the sunshine most days, so that's great. Loving that.
I would suggest it went dark in Brussels the minute Ms. von der Leyen took over the commission. Then the darkness really descended upon us.
Yeah, it went dark for all of us that day.
And they say it's just women that can be bitchy. I can be bitchy, no bother. But anyway, Eva, this week, at last, John Swinney has an initiative, which is fantastic. I never knew he had any at all. But here, this was what he said. He's decided he wants to have a cross-party initiative to unite Civic Scotland against the real threat from the far right. Okay, it's a question I've asked numerous British politicians, not just Scottish ones, all of them. No one ever answers. What now? I mean, when I was younger, it was easier to discern what was left, what was right. I have my own beliefs in what it is, that there is no left and right anymore. But what is this far right? What's the definition of far right?
I can't answer that, and neither can John Swinney, because he's not defined it. His press release and his comments when asked about it made it very plain that this is just another squirrel, because he's not got the gumption to address the real issue, which is the urgent need for our nation's independence. And I wish I could say I was surprised by this grand announcement, but I'm not at all, because it's just another one in a long line of alternative measures to look as if he's doing something, but he's not really doing anything. Remember, you had a couple of years ago Ben McPherson talking in terms of a gradualist approach and the benefits of devolution. You'd had Mike Russell and his 11-point plan. You had Keith Brown appointed some sort of independence minister at some stage. So was Jamie Hepburn. But these initiatives have all been forgotten about now. What you've got instead, with the party that said that independence was their priority, their website had a revamp, and they've now a nice yes section on it where they say a refreshed case for an independent Scotland requires a fresh campaign, a campaign that understands the new circumstances and the modern media landscape. But there's no independence campaign coming from the SNP, either as a party or as the party of government. It's not happening. They're having some sort of meeting next month regarding the Constitution, but it's not the Constitution of the country that they're there to talk about. They're going to debate the Constitution of the party. So you can see their priorities. He wants to enter into dialogue with Unionists. He wants to speak to Labour, Tory, Green. What about? Is he complaining to them about reform? Because reform in local elections are seeming to get, a reasonable amount of the vote, 10, 15, 20%, more than that in some parts of England. So is he really talking not about the future of Scotland, but about the future of individual political parties, i.e. his and the others with whom he's overly chummy? Because that's certainly the impression that's given, and I would suggest it's the impression he intends to give, because independence is a word that very rarely crosses his lips.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, Phil. He's desperate for to form an alliance against reform, and quickly called this convention together. We've been pleading with him for years to call a constitutional convention for Scottish independence. Nothing, silence. And should I just say, ladies and gentlemen, we knew we were going to discuss this, so I did send an email to the SNP inviting them to send someone along, and I've had no reply. You can see it. I introduced myself as the host of Through a Scottish Prism this week. John Swinney has spoken of the danger of the far right in Scottish-British politics. We will be making this a main theme of our podcast this weekend. Would John or any other member of the SNP leadership team be available for an interview to define clearly for the Scottish public who is it that the First Minister and his party regard as far right, and what is the actual danger is that we should be looking out for? And also, why is it deemed appropriate to call a convention for this, but not seen as appropriate to call a Scottish Constitutional Convention for our independence at this time? Now, I thought that was a fairly reasonable email, Phil. I got no response, ignored. They didn't reply to me, didn't even tell me to f off. They certainly didn't buy me a gin. And it tells me if they've got something to hide, or are they just so contemptuous of all the voters?
Contemptuous for sure. There is no definition of the right that I've heard, and clearly he's talking about reform here. But yeah, the bigger question is, of course, the Scottish Constitutional Convention for Independence. That's what SNP should be concerned with. He is more concerned with British democracy and retaining the status quo than he is in Scotland. And that is what he and the SNP management now represent. The Unionist press even picks up on this. The Herald led with Swinney sowing division among Unionist parties with Summit, and an article on the 27th of February. And it was John Swinney's spokesperson who defended the use of taxpayers' cash to hold a cross-party summit on combating Nigel Farage's Reform Party. And this is ahead of the next year's Holyrood elections. And on Wednesday, the First Minister said he would invite Anna Sarwar, Russell Finlay, Alex Cole-Hamilton, Patrick Havry, Lorna Slater and Ash Regan to a line in the sand gathering on the rise of the far right. Has he been paying attention to Conservative and Labour policy recently? It's not just reform, it's more of the same from reform. They're just going a wee bit further. But when I specifically he was talking about reform, he said, yeah, he admitted it. So speaking to a journalist after the First Minister's question time on Thursday, Swinney's official spokesman confirmed that this would be a gathering to discuss how we check the language here, how we stand up to the politics of Nigel Farage. He also said he didn't expect Reform to ask to attend. Now, as Eva pointed out, the most recent polling suggests Reform could win as many as 15 seats in Scotland. Nigel Farage's party, which would give him and that party a significant influence in Parliament, where a governing party has no majority, and that is most likely to happen. Earlier in the day, even John Curtis has gone on to this. He's saying the First Minister was trying to sow division with the call of the summon. But what does it really mean? It means that John Swinney and the SNP are interested in business as usual. The usual suspects. The SNP are now part of the problem, not the solution, and have been since Nicola. Under the current leadership and since Nicola took us down the garden path, John Swinney is now clearly stating that he's happy to retain the status quo, which has got us nowhere, except worse off with higher poverty and horrendous development figures. We're going nowhere. We're going nowhere fast, and the poor continue to suffer. The working poor, which should be a contradiction in terms, but sadly in Scotland and the UK it is not. Now the usual suspects, that's what he wants. He wants the usual parties to slug it out for control of the big council that is Holyrood. Why not independence, John? By doing this, it's exactly like Nicola did, trying to stop Brexit instead of getting us out of the UK. Remember, I kept talking about it at the time. Why? Do never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake, and that's what Napoleon, one of his great lessons. But he's continuing Nicola's work here, which is her work was to scupper independence, and she's done it, sowing dissatisfaction and splitting the Unionists, splitting the SNP away from what was the independence movement to stand on their own, much closer to their friends, the Unionists. And this is evidence they're doing the same. We won't get unification.
But here's
So,
another thing, sorry to interrupt you, Phil, but here's another indication of John's thinking, because what he's saying is, I will lead the SNP into the 2031 Hollywood election. Well, that tells me that he's written off the 26 election, even with a victory, that he's not going to go for independence because he's going to be looking for more devolution in 2031. Listen, folks out there, how much more do you need? Believe them when they tell you.
correct, and you know, he's like he's bought and sold for English gold, as Nicola was. These are the same kind of shysters that Rabbie Burns spoke so eloquently of. And even the BBC reported and picked up this. Can John Swinney lead a united front against reform? It was Campbell, I think it was. He said there was at least two ways of looking at what John Swinney's offer was about: to convene a summit of mainstream party and civic leaders to counter political forces they reject, showing the unification between SNP and the Unionist parties. It says many people will accept the face value of this leadership move and applaud it, his effort to achieve domestic consensus at a time of global upheaval and uncertainty. No, the majority of people in Scotland want out, and we want to take advantage of the hell that's going on. And his last comment in the BBC article was that said that Swinney had demonstrated commitment to build consensus at Holyrood since becoming First Minister. Consensus with the Unionist parties. Why would he do that? Build consensus amongst the Unionist parties instead of taking advantage of this horrific right-wing policy. These and the cabal are continue to do what Nicola did, and John would rather have Unionists who he's comfortable with than the more radical right that he considers. And by exactly what you're saying, leading Scotland beyond 2031. I mean, as long as they're in charge, SNP will not be an effective party for the unification of the Yes movement and therefore the gaining of Scotland's independence. And all the media is picking up on this. The Sun even said about this when he announced that he was going to go beyond 2031, because he revealed that he would try and stay on as First Minister beyond 2031. In his 70s, he'll be 72 when he finishes. And it's appalling. This means we're going to continue with this avoidance of doing anything that might upset the union, keep the snouts in the trough, and not do anything, not one step towards independence. That's where the current leadership of SNP are taking us, and John Swinney is just part of the problem, not the solution. He needs to be ousted, and appalling, absolutely appalling. There is no leadership here. It's a continued betrayal of the people of Scotland and our wants.
It sure is. I mean, I'm a great believer, Alan, as I say, you know, we haven't had this definition for anyone what they call far right. I believe now that it's horizontal and vertical, not left and right. It's them at the top that have, and the rest of us below that don't, and they're taking as much from us as they can. So I believe it's horizontal, vertical. But is someone of the right, as far as John's concerned, is it someone unlike John who can define what a woman is, an adult human female? Is it someone who doesn't agree with the GRR? Is that extreme right wing? Is it someone that doesn't, like Swinney, believe that everything was okay in Ukraine and we should back the fascists? Is that, if we call them fascist, does that make us the right wing? What is the right wing definition?
I mean, my interpretation of right wing definition or extreme politics are those who are quite happy to freeze our pensioners, those who are quite happy to starve our children, those who are quite happy to cut £3 billion from disability benefits to then transfer that money over to Ukraine to pay for their war machine. That to me is extreme politics. And every single one of these parties that you have mentioned has had a role to play in either one or all of those issues. Now, why do we need a political convention to to stop the right-wing ideology coming in, especially when many of these unionists are right-wing themselves. And John, let's face it, John's not exactly a socialist. We don't need anything. We need an independence convention set up, because only the Scottish people can change the politics of this country. John has fallen into the same trap that Nicola Sturgeon fell into over Brexit. He's trying to save England from themselves. That's not our job. Our job is to look after our citizens, make sure our citizens can live and work, and if they're disabled, have some dignity in their lives, because we don't have that within this union. We need to build up an independence movement and work within ourselves, not unionists, because unionists will never ever support Scottish independence. If we have them on board, we will never ever get independence for our country. With an independence convention, we can convince those who are in the other parties, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, and even the Tories, because there was an independent Tory organisation up and running during 2014, to then leave their parties and come on board with us. Even if that is the independence with independence, if they don't want to join another political party. But there's only one way to change our country, to fit in with the philosophy of our country, and to look after every single one of our citizens. And that is by uniting this movement and rising as one and being independent. We are the only ones who will be able to do that. The unionists, they could get away to where they should be.
Well, let me just give my take now. I normally just I don't give my take, but I believe that we have the Liberal Party, the British Liberal Party, are of the right. That the British Labour Party are far right. That the British Conservative and Unionist are extreme right, and Nigel and his pals are just the Sieg Heil Party. That's how I view them, and I wouldn't touch any of them with a barge pole. And why, as you've all pointed out, we're doing anything to help. This is really mainly an English problem, because they're an English nationalist party. They're not a Scottish nationalist party. They're not a British nationalist party, Reform. And we should leave them. And I mean, Ireland shows us so many lessons. The time to get at them is when they're having difficulties down there, and they're having difficulties because the two-boy changing seats is about to go with this third party coming through the middle. So anyway, it's really quite disturbing. But the fact is, even Sarwar, who's now not so, was talking about he was going to win the election, be the next First Minister and all that, Eva, but this week, this is typical of him. Even if the SNP, as he puts it, and the Greens and all the indie parties win an election, at least as far as he's concerned, the Brits will not allow, they will just ignore democracy as always and not allow a referendum or anything else. They're just undemocratic, and it's time for people to realise a wasted vote for Labour or Tory or Liberals, they are not democratic parties, and they are certainly not Scottish parties.
See, that's actually some pretty good advice that Anas has given John Swinney there. And John Swinney would be well advised to pay attention. What needs to happen is, as we say every week, we need one independent supporting candidate in the constituency, and we need a proper organised presence on the list. And then we get a supermajority. And that supermajority is what gives us the legal validity to go international for support for a declaration of independence. But you see, all of this just plays into John Swinney's hands, and he can continue to make speeches that don't include the word independence, because he can talk about stronger for Scotland, he can talk about Scottish prosperity, he can talk about decisions that are made in Scotland, but he can hide behind a facade, and this is a facade from Sarwar, because we all know that if the people of Scotland voted for independent supporting parties and there was a majority, there would be substantial international support in the context of negotiating the terms of the independent settlement. But what will happen is that the SNP on current form will insist that it's another SNP1, SNP2 vote in Holyrood 26. And they'll do that because they think they'll get away with it. But I strongly suspect, and I think the rest of you do too, that if they carry on in the moribund fashion that they're in, they're going to lose a lot of their seats in Holyrood as well, because people are fed up with seeing very little action. And the right wing, whether it's Reform or just people voting Unionist or staying at home, will be the victors, because of the very poor condition of the independence movement, because the SNP are failing to lead it, and because of the poor performance of the Scottish Government. I mean, you saw during the week, John Swinney was struggling when he was asked about women and gender recognition reform and what have you. And he's just said the other day, again, that trans women are women. The Women and Equalities Minister, who's just resigned from Labour in Westminster, Annalise Dodds, has previously said the same thing, but she's resigned because of the issues about the aid budget and the defence budget, etc. So this is a point in time when Labour, although they've a vast majority, are actually making a fool of themselves in an awful lot of different ways. And it's exactly why and when the independence movement should be striking. And it should be a case of John Swinney being in touch with all the leaders of all the independence parties and movements and talk about a convention on independence, not a convention on any other matter, because independence is the only method by which Scotland will prosper. You know, the political story of the year, or decade, in fact, is to be the closure of the Grangemouth refinery. The Scottish Government made money available at the same time as the redundancy notices were going out. Westminster's made 200 million available now that the redundancy notices have gone out. This is ridiculous. Nobody is talking in terms of keeping the refinery open and continuing to process our oil there. And that's what they should be doing. There should be mass movements of people supporting the workers at Grangemouth because of its importance to Scotland nationally, because it is a national resource that we cannot do without. It's action on matters like this that are needed by everybody, but especially by the SNP at this point in time, and put Labour to shame, because Labour have made no cogent attempt to rescue Grangemouth, to save the refinery. They're talking about a just transition, they're talking about aviation fuel, they are not talking about what they should be speaking about, which is Scotland's oil.
No, of course they're not. Here we go. Even we've got that Sarwar, and we discussed it a few weeks ago in here, Phil. Stuart MacDonald and Jean Freeman saying, yeah, the SNP should think about a coalition with the Labour Party, the two left of centre, they call them. Parties, no left, no left if I hit them in the face. But they were advocating it, and they're not the only two in the SNP who were advocating. I mean, Humza talked about it, Nicola talked about it, wanting to do a deal with Labour. Labour make it quite clear, even if you do a deal with them, they're never going to agree to anything that leads us any closer to independence. You're muted, mate. You're muted.
Sorry about that one. Yeah, it's really simple. It's simply a fact that the SNP are now devolutionists, and they have been for quite some time. Why? Because it's the best way to keep their noses in the trough, and that's that batch that went down with some of these people went down with me in 2015 to Westminster, and have had a very, very lucrative career out of it. And as I said many times, they're not going to get that money anywhere else. And the delusion with some, and I'm not going to name names on this point. No. But there are the people down there who were on very low salaries before they went in. And that's not the metric. By the way, this is just not the metric that I measure life with, you know. But some people do, especially when you're not making a great deal of cash and you need it. And you get something like this and you get the ego. The ego has landed when a lot of these people landed down in Westminster, because they actually believed that, oh, I'm really important and I can now, well, I went from 15 grand, I can go up to, now I'm up to 70 or 80 or 90 grand. I'll maybe just go, when I finish this, I'll go back down about 45. I'll probably get a job worth that. They've got no idea how this works. You're played. The system plays you. Again, I get back to revolving doors. If you're Labour, you used to go into local authorities and local government, once you come out of governance, and for the Tories it's into private industry, and that's where they get their reward. Now they're all going into private industry. That's why they're so well aligned. That's why they're so similar. Two cheeks of the same arse, as we keep going on about. Because when they do come out of providing the policies that are written primarily by lawyers and QCs or KCs now, that are hired by the lobbyists who are controlled by the corporations. That's how they get back in. So that's why these people, SNP, are devolutionists. Sarwar, even if we win a democratic election, the Brits will ensure that we never get independence. We have to think outside the box, and we've had plenty of plans and plenty of opportunities to do it. We know what we need to do. Why isn't SNP doing it? I mean, even the mainstream press are reporting on this, because no independence referendum in next Holyrood term if SNP win, says Sarwar. He says it should be geared towards issues like the NHS rather than independence. And John Swinney's buying that line. SNP have bought that line hook, line and sinker. Why? Why aren't you fighting for it? I mean, Sarwar went on, there's no independence referendum with a term in the next, election. Polls have shifted significantly, right, in recent months ahead of this Parliament election in Holyrood. And moving from predicting a Labour lead, suggesting that the party could instead suffer its worst results since devolution. However, if the SNP wins again, which is probably unlikely, even if Labour crash, because with the rise of reform, and a pro-independence majority returns, that will only happen with Unify, and it's not going to happen with SNP current leadership. The UK government will still not grant an independence referendum, Sarwar said. And he's telling the truth. We know what they want. Why do these idiots continue to keep wanting to work along with Labour? Why would you offer that when you know you're not getting what the Scottish people want? Well, the reality is they don't represent the Scottish people. They represent themselves. And, even in the BBC Sunday show, on the final day of the party conference, Sarwar said Scottish Labour would prove the pollsters wrong and win the election. There'll be no independent. He just repeated it again. That it's not going to happen. So SNP, if you're serious about independence, which we now know you're not, but the members that are in there, if you're still there because you believe that you can change it within, start changing it, because you're losing it. You're losing it for all of Scotland, and you've betrayed us, and you're part of the problem, not the solution. It just makes you angry that they're not standing up for the people of Scotland at a time when things are going to get even worse. It's appalling.
They're not democratic. We know the Unionists aren't. I mean, they only have one policy, which is, well, two policies: SNP bad and oppose everything independence, Alan. They have nothing else, absolutely nothing else in their armoury. But John and the SNP are playing along with that. And instead of going at these people and attacking them and uniting us and getting us ready for independence, they're more now about winning elections than actually going for independence.
Yeah, but I'm getting sick and tired of people talking about referendums. We are not asking for another referendum. Sarwar, you will not have the opportunity to say you are not getting a referendum. Because if we receive over 50% of the vote, that is a declaration of independence at a democratic election. We are no longer asking your permission because we do not need your permission. You keep telling us this is an equal union. Well, we will find out, because if it's not an equal union, then the UN will have to intervene on a decolonisation of this country. And I welcome Salvo's approach, getting into as close to the C24 committee as they have at this present time. But we are fighting this on many, many angles. We have Salvo fighting through the international areas. We have us on the streets, speaking to neighbours, family, friends, and anyone we can convince of independence, because that is what we are going to be doing. But a referendum, we ain't wanting a referendum. The election on 2026 will be an election to declare independence for our country. And John, never mind standing for First Minister after that, you should be standing to make yourself unemployed. Because that's what every true nationalist standing in 2026 should be doing. Our goal is independence, not a job for life.
You're absolutely right. Or you should be aiming to be the first minister of an independent Scotland. Show that bit of ambition and get the people behind you. Because one of the things that's destroyed, they're saying there's no getting away from it. And it's been proved with what's happening over in America, and we'll come on to that shortly. But, go woke, go broke. And get into the gender issues, absolutely destroyed the Yes movement, the SNP, and caused the divisions without a doubt. Eva. but the Labour Party, who have sort of been slinking in and out, we believe it, we don't, we're in, we're not. But in the last day of their conference last weekend, this was after we had recorded the show, they rejected a motion calling for the Scottish Government to have single-sex spaces for boys and girls based on biology. Well, why wouldn't you? But it was voted down by the Labour members, describing it as misinformation. Unbelievable, Eva.
You hardly know where to start with this, because in the last few weeks, principally because of the publicity of the Sandy Peggy case, there have been innumerable lawyers and legal professors and, you know, people that are pretty clued up, explaining in words of one syllable in the media and on social media what the law says. And the law says in Scotland that girls and boys should have separate toilets in schools. That's the law. Anything other than that is guidance, which is not the law. The Scottish Labour motion, I would have suggested, is actually promoting something that's unlawful, because they're refusing to have single-sex spaces for boys and girls. I can think of very little other things that are more precious than the safeguarding of our children. And Labour, with this position, would be jeopardising that, because they have this notion that a trans-identifying child can self-identify their gender, but they interpret gender to mean sex rather than keeping the two separate. So we've also got the dreadful spectacle of John Swinney and Neil Gray tying themselves in knots, because everybody knows that Sandy Peggy's case is a valid one, because the employment regulations say that men and women have to have different spaces. That's very clear. There are no circumstances to justify a male being in a female space. There's an arguable case if the male has a GRC, but in Sandy Peggy's case, the male does not have a GRC. So you'll find that the guidance for the NHS, for the police, for the Scottish Prison Service, the transgender guidance for schools, all of these items have been drafted using Stonewall law, where people were able to self-identify. And that's the nonsense of the position that we're all seeing coming true now. John Swinney does not actually believe that a trans-identifying male, a trans woman, is a woman. He doesn't believe that. John Swinney will not want, I would imagine, trans-identifying males to be sharing spaces with the female relatives that he's got. I would imagine that very few people in the Scottish Parliament would agree that position if it was applied to them and their families, but they think it won't be. And they have an idea that predators are able to be safeguarded against, even although you have gender self-ID and allow people into spaces for the opposite sex. We've seen innumerable instances of where predators take advantage of this, and they continue so to do. I understand it's the case that there still remain males serving sentence in female jails in Scotland, so that problem is still there, and it's an absolute and utter disgrace. It should not be happening. It was confirmed during the week that some of the police, and I think the transport police as well, allow gender self-ID, and in Police Scotland there are similar issues. So there's a lot of work still to be done by Women Won't Wheesht and all the others, and the men who support the women too. But it's dreadfully embarrassing, and it's really quite dangerous.
I believe the tide is turning, and we've got to say, and we've all made our position, we're not Trumpites on here, but he does some things that are, I agree with, I've got to say. And one of the things he's doing, one, he's kicking all the LGBT people out of the US military. That's happening very quickly, but he's also stopping a lot of the aid. His freeze is going to force Stonewall, which Eva was talking about there, Phil, to cut up to half their staff now. As we know, they've been, as Eva's just said, they've been writing the bloody legislation, and now half of them are going to be paid off, because no longer is USAID going to be paying their wages. And that's exactly what Simon Blake, the chief executive, in his announcement to these teams, said they were shocked that they're going to be losing so many. It'll happen to organisations throughout the UK and further afield. I'm delighted to hear that. But it just shows you that it was that slush fund of the Democrats that was funding a lot of this, and it was American government that was promoting LGBTQ, XYZ, PNSS, whatever the hell it is this week.
Yep, that's pretty much in a nutshell what's going on here. And Stonewall said it's trying to meet the challenges of this new political era. It quotes, after it was reported but in the LGBTQ plus charity could be forced to cut up half of its staff. And in the week of the US President's overseas aid phrase. How does that work? Well, the charity told the BBC that an organisation-wide consultation has begun. Hard-won rights are being rolled back for marginalised communities across the world. That's the quotation they come out with. Only roles with dedicated funding would be saved. So this is what this CEO guy said. That's what he told them on Thursday. And we asked how much foreign aid spending cuts related to their decision, how much that affected it. He said there's a number of reasons for this consultation being required. He said the charity's largest funder in recent years has been the Global Equity Fund, or GEF, which is overseen by the US State Department. There's the link. And it has given Stonewall more than $500,000 between 2021 and 2025. So what you say is bang on the money. Stonewall's accounts show that the GEF granted it $137,000 in 21-22, $204,000 in 22-23, and $233,000 in 23-24. So it's consistently funding this work, and it knows exactly what's gone because who pays the money. I mean, as you know, the statistic, about 97% of all scientists agree with whoever funds the money for their research. It's true. It's just the way it is. It's the same here. So the GEF, it's a pooled fund from several countries and private business with a focus on advancing LGBTI rights. Obviously, the pharmacists are in there, the big pharma are in there, but according to the Times, it's not published accounts since 2015. So President Trump is a long-term critic of overseas spending. We've seen what he's done. He didn't do as much, but this has been one of the most whirlwind, like it or lump it, initial starts to a presidency or any leadership that anyone has seen. He's actually doing what he said he was going to do. Now, a lot of it I don't agree with. I think any of us agree. Nobody agrees. Anybody who's civilised doesn't agree with him supporting what Israel's doing right now. But what he's saying is this overseas spending needs to be brought into line with America First strategy that he's put in place. So they've announced a freeze in funding for aid projects while undertakes a review to ensure they align with Trump's priorities. And here's the problem. You've put some guy like Elon Musk in place, and what he's doing, he's using a business practice which you can do for departments that are failing. You can test it to destruction. You do cut until it fails, and then you gradually build back until it works again. And what you've done is very quickly cut out a lot of the dead wood. And it's a valid and valuable management system. But you don't do it in governments, and this is what he's doing. People get badly hurt. You destroy the services, the support services that are so essential for people all around the world. And this is what's happening in America, and that will continue to happen. So some of the good work that is being done is funded by GEF. That will suffer as well as the nonsense stuff that has been bought. So appalling. And what was it? Yeah, back onto the Bliss conference. Do you know what I thought? Obviously, Eva nailed it very, very bang on the money. But Unheard, the report, was absolutely brilliant when they reported it about this Bliss conference, defeat emotion on single-sex basis. Because they report, read it if you get the chance. Unheard, as in the cows and sheep and stuff like that. Don't be a sheep, read Unheard. The Labour government quietly broke another promise it made to women. Not the WASPy Women for a Change, although that was atrocious in itself. Now it's Annalisa Dodds, the supposed Minister for Women and Equalities, gave a pat in the head to men who want to use women-only spaces. It was sneaked out in a dry statement from the government's Office for Equality and Opportunity earlier this week, and amounts to nothing less than the acceptance of an informal policy on self-ID in shops, gyms and refuges. absolutely appalling, because the change is buried in a report on the way organisations interpret the single sex exemption in the 2010 Equality Act. And earlier this year, Dodd's predecessor as Women's Minister, Kemi Badenoch, launched a call for evidence to discover whether public and private bodies were wrongly suggesting that people have a legal right to access single-sex spaces on the basis of self-ID. Badenoch took a robust line on men who want to invade women-only spaces, but the responses have fallen into the hands of a government much, much more open to the unrelenting demands of trans activists. So that's why we're in the doo-doo, and it's not right, and it needs to be changed.
Yeah, it's the hypocrisy of the Labour Party, Alan. And as I say, it would seem that the Labour Party, and we're going to come on to the next topic, are swimming against what's happening. They're swimming against the ending of this. That the American government, who started it and funded it mainly, are determined to end it, and they're going to defund it. They're going to, get rid of all the woke practices, all the DEI. But Labour and the British government and the Scottish government are hanging in there to the end, are they not? Instead of seeing, smelling the coffee.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, even when Trump does something right, he makes an arse of it. Because when he put this thing forward, what he also banned was the word women and disability from being mentioned in any government document, because he just did a blanket for what's known as woke. So I wish he would just take more advice and sit down and do things properly. But I think we also have to make quite clear, LGB, good, TQ plus, get them out, because the two of them are totally separate things. TQ plus did exactly what Pi did and latched onto the LGB movement in the 70s. We should remember that the LGB are not bad people. But the funding of Stonewall should be stopped through every public body. They are not welcome. They are a danger to women, and they are a danger to children. Even some of the founders are ashamed of that organisation now. I mean, the organisation should just break up and go away. And remember, Stonewall, who were supposed to be brought in for the LGBT community, were also the ones who objected to same-sex marriage at the very beginning. So who do they actually represent now? They've been infiltrated very badly. But we should also remember, Labour are not the only ones that are two-faced on this. Because the Tories, when they were in power, could have put this to bed once and for all. And that was by putting one word in the Equality Act. And that word was biological. Didn't even have to go through Parliament, because it was tidying up an act. It wasn't changing the act, it was clearing it up. Putting biological sex. I think it was Badenoch that was the Equality Minister at the time. She could have done that like that. But unfortunately, these politicians like to play political games and score political points rather than deal with real issues. And I'm getting sick and tired of them playing with people's lives, especially when it's putting people's lives in danger. Stop playing the politics. Get it done, and get it done now.
Yeah. Something else I read this week, was one that Duncan Bannatyne, him from the, the Dragon's Den, who has all these gymnasiums, and he was approached by the trans mob and said, about the changing rooms for women. He said, well, he offered to put in a separate changing room for trans. No, we don't want that. Nope. We want to be in the women's one.
That's right.
It just proves it's just the fetishists. Just a side issue, but here's a question. Stonewall was now found is funded by a foreign government, albeit the Americans, who are allegedly, and we'll come on to that in a minute, an ally, but it's a foreign government funding this. Surely that should immediately ban them from all government buildings, from all government legislation. They should not be allowed near an MSP. They should be banned completely. If it was Russia, if they just suddenly realised it was Russia and China who were financing this, can you imagine how long Stonewall would last? They'd be gone by tomorrow morning.
Well, if you look at their influence, they've been in innumerable schools, Scottish Government, public bodies, whether that's Prison Service, Police Scotland, British Transport Police, all these organisations have been infiltrated and influenced by Stonewall. I wouldn't be surprised if you find that that's what's happened in the NHS Fife, because it seems to have happened in all the other health areas. And it's interesting to see that although the Sandy Peggy case is about the position of an employee within the NHS Trust, there is guidance for transgendered patients that I've spoken about before in each trust, where self-ID has been in place in some places since 2011, so that patients could self-identify into the wards for the gender that they nominated, not their biological sex. And the guidance that is most distressing, I would say, in that regard is probably that one for NHS for Greater Glasgow and Clyde, where there's a case study of a complaint made by a woman because there's a trans-identifying male, a trans woman in her ward. And the advice from the Health Trust is that the woman who's complaining is the person who's causing the problem, because the trans-identifying male has every entitlement to be there. And the way to deal with matters is to deal with the complainer, who, if necessary, could be moved elsewhere. So there's something very, very wrong afoot in Scotland, and it comes from Stonewall and whoever it was that invited them in the first place. But no, they should not be allowed in government bodies, they shouldn't be allowed in quangos, they shouldn't be allowed in charities. They should really be chased out of public life altogether and not have the malign influence that they seem to have had in recent years, which is a pity, because in the early days, Stonewall was a much needed, much valued organisation, but unfortunately that has not proven, it's not stood the test of time.
No, it's not. As I say, the most important thing for me is that a foreign government is funding something, and that should immediately outlaw it. I mean, if you were to do it to America, if we were to be funding something over there, like Black Lives Matter, Jesus, the B-52s would be taking us out by Monday morning. The clock's kicking on, so there's some things I want to move on to, Phil, because I don't want to miss out on this one. And this week, they're making much of it Starmer's great trip to Washington, and how he was brilliant and what a statesman and what a leader. And actually, I take the exact opposite view. One, again, I talk about him swimming against the tide. He's talking about supporting Ukraine forever, till the last Ukrainian dies, and giving them money, and Trump's meanwhile doing something else. But there's a couple of videos I want to play as well. He's gone over to Washington, and it was nauseating, actually, watching him and Lammy sucking up after all the things they'd said. Because let's remember some of the things that Lammy said. For example, he was a neo-Nazi, something racist, KKK Nazi sympathizer, a sociopath, a tyrant in a toupee, and now, Donald's his hero. And that's just Lammy. But they've gone in there and they've said, oh, well, I got a great reception. But actually, if you look at the politics of it, and I know you do, the day before Starmer arrived, he slapped the EU with the tariffs. And so when Starmer arrived, he was crapping himself in case the same was going to happen while he was there. And they played him like an absolute fish. And if I may, I'd like to play a couple of wee clips on this. And this is Trump taking
between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the core.
Could you take on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
all right, one or two more. Yes.
I mean, can you take on Russia by yourself? Now, what he didn't get, and when he was questioned after this, because what Starmer, like the rest of Europe, they want to still play the big macho, imperialistic world power and go in and say, but we need the Americans to back us up. They didn't get that commitment. They didn't get it. And when he was questioned after Starmer, he was kind of, and Trump was the same. But here's another one, two other I may play just before we talk about this whole trip. And this is Vance now ripping the brown stuff from him.
At the Munich Security Conference, Vice President Vance condemned, for free speech violations in the UK, particularly. Could you respond? What is your best?
I have an idea. We have the man right here. Come on. Yeah, Jamie, we're putting you on stage.
Great. Yeah, look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US systems, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
It's absolutely embarrassing, Phil. He was like getting scolded and trying to speak. No, but no, ma'am, no, miss, no, miss, no, miss.
Yeah, it was funny to watch, and tragic, but it's the terrible state of affairs. Trump nailed it. Vance nailed it. They're right about infringements and free speech, although they're also doing it themselves. But one thing that did come out of that was that Trump did hint that the sanctions that were applied to Europe and the EU may not apply to Britain. Not saying that they won't be, but they may not be. So and what actually happened? Well, when you look at it, this is Starmer swimming against the US-Russian peace tide, as you mentioned this earlier, Roddy, and declaring undying support for the Banderists regime, the Ukrainian fascist right-wing regime. And it's appalling that Britain is still doing that and other European countries are doing that. And it was, here's one that really jumped out at me, absolutely jumped out at me. This was in Defence News, right? A piece of media run by the military industrial complex. And it reported, it says, Starmer urges Trump not to abandon Ukraine in press to end Russian war. British Prime Minister used a visit to Washington on Thursday to press President Donald Trump not to abandon Ukraine as he looks to find a quick endgame to Russia's bloody invasion of its neighbour. This is the warmongers saber rattling. I'm quoting them here, and this was amazing and touches on something you mentioned earlier. It goes on to report. And bear in mind, I'm talking about Defence News here. With a mix of flattery and frank talk, the centre-left Starmer, that's a laugh, made the case to the Republican president to remain cautious as he goes about ending the biggest conflict in Europe since World War II. Now, they almost celebrate that it's the biggest conflict in Europe since it was World War II. This is saber rattling of the highest order. But here's the bit you touched on earlier. The British Premier started the visit by delivering an invitation from King Charles III to come to Scotland for a historic state visit, noting it was an unprecedented honour since Trump already had been given the royal treatment by Queen Elizabeth II during his first term in office. Gie the boke, that just makes you sick. And all the pomp and circumstance, that's where they are now, as Britain desperately tries to hang on to what little influence it had by simply kissing Trump's ass and pleading with Trump to appease his ego and appealing to his ego. It's absolutely appalling. And remember that famous Russian politician in 2013, I forget the guy's name, who remarked that the UK is a small island that no one listens to anymore. 100% right. Because what are the UK armed forces? Trump's nailed it. You know, what are the UK armed forces going to do against Russia? The most professional and well-organised and equipped armies in the world without America? Nothing is the answer. He's lying through his teeth. He cannot deliver what he says he will. Sweden even piped in. Well, good luck, Sweden, guaranteeing Ukraine will join NATO. Utter nonsense. If the US are out of it, and they've said they're out of it, it's massive news. And it's news we should be celebrating and supporting, that we're stopping the needless murder and war of young men, and the destruction of a people and a country, even one so corrupt as Ukraine. So Russia, we should be happy that the US and Russia are now realigning the foreign policy for the better. We don't want war. We certainly don't want nuclear war. This is what we want. Listen to Colonel Douglas MacGregor. Listen to Scott Ritter, the Jordan Mearsheimer, etc. The fiddle playing that Washington pulled. We just saw it. The Guardian even picked up on it about about Starmer trying to woo Trump, because that's what he was doing. This was Andrew Roth in Washington. But has the UK relationship with the US lost its spark? Of course it has. There is nothing. There is nothing left. I mean, this was the question. And to be honest, the report in the Guardian was pretty good. It's well worth reading it, but it's just more of the same misinformation. We see in this report the typical lies continuing, that the war was down to the Russian invasion, nothing to do with us, nothing to do with the West. And now that this information's coming out, and the US are starting to tell the truth about what happened, some of the truth about what really happened in Ukraine. Everybody's trying to save face and trying to double down on their mistake, but again, all the charm in the world will not change anything. The tiny little loyal British puppy has very little bite anymore, and that goes for the rest of Europe.
Indeed. Here's another one that came out, Alan, from Trump, because we were talking about it the other day, that he has no filter. He just says what's in there. And that's the great thing, because he's not a politician. He's not a professional politician. He, like most of them, and he dropped this one, and that stupid Starmer walked right into it. Because while, as we know, Donald sent a bill. I mean, it's great. The Americans start a war, a proxy war. You lose 1 million plus people, then they come in and say, "We've given you all this stuff. You're now going to pay us back." They did it to us in the Second World War and the First World War, and they're doing it to Ukraine. They've been given a bill for 350 billion. But here's what this stupid Starmer, understand this, you British taxpayers.
Money, we don't get the money back. Biden made a deal. He put in $350 billion. And I thought it was a very unfair situation.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some lends, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
Is the president
gifted? We gifted the money. We didn't even have the sense to say buy British arms with the money we give you, or pay us back, or give us some of that ground. We're too stupid. It's just, this is, guys, a clown.
We gifted money that we did not have, because we're cutting money from pensioners, from women, from children, from workers. We didn't have that money to give to anyone, especially not for wars. But I mean, in America, Donald is, the way to deal with Donald is either stroke his ego or fill his pockets. That's the way to deal with Donald, because he likes those two things. What you need to do is get a backbone and actually stand up to him. I mean, just now, I mean, he started off by saying Russia's got to get this, Russia's got to get this, it's all Ukraine's fault. And then he's come up with this, well, actually, if you give us your minerals, we'll maybe come up here and defend you. That's not looking for defence, that's racketeering. I mean, you're all old enough to remember going to the pictures, and the wee laddie would come up to your car door and say, "Here's 50 pence and I'll look after your car." That's what that is. We'll look after you as long as you give us this money. Give us these minerals. And I mean, we'll steal from you, but we'll make sure Russia can't do the same. That's what it's all about. But we need to get politicians that have got a backbone and just stand up to them and say, "No, Donald, you're supposed to be a leader of your country. Act like it. Take a decision. Stick with the decision. If you find out that decision's wrong, by all means change it, but tell us why you're changing that. And if you keep pushing us the way you're pushing us, see all your troops, take them home. Let's see how long that takes before your country is in jeopardy over its defence. Because the only reason America is defended so well is because there are troops based all around the world that's able to respond immediately. Without them, America is just as vulnerable as everyone else. And it's time we started using the power that we have. I mean, I would like to just say to Donald, anyway, take your troops. Then, by the way, See these nuclear weapons you've got there as well? Take them away, or we could always send them by airmail.
Yeah, put them on eBay. No, I disagree with you this one. I think, taking their troops home, they'd be safer, because then they're guarding their own borders. And I mean, even if they were to get their way and defeat Russia in war, there's not enough troops to it's the biggest landmass in the world. It's just not going to happen. And it's the same in America. You couldn't, even if they were conquered by the Russians or the Chinese, there's not enough soldiers in the Chinese, even with their population, to control a conquered country. So take your troops, put them on your own borders, and get the hell out of Europe. But here's it. This week, while the British were saying how they supported Ukraine, Eva, they're all behind it. Real British as always. Look who's also backing the British policy. Well, they're paint me purple and slap my bum with a feather. Our John's backing British foreign policy, the illegal invasion of Russia. John's up there with the Brits. And let's just remember what John's supporting. There you go. There's some of your Ukrainian soldiers. Here's what was in the papers before the war. All the different papers, the Guardian, the Mail, the lot, telling you about the Nazis and how fascist they were. And now John is telling us that Scotland supports the fascist regime in Kiev. Not in my name, Eva.
We've said this before. He doesn't have the right to say that, but he's trying to parade himself on the international stage by hanging on to the British coattails. It's what Phil said earlier on about the SNP having bought into British democracy. They are completely unwilling to think outside that British democratic box and think about what does Scotland need. And for every minute that John Swinney spends thinking about or writing or delivering a speech about Ukraine or any other international matter, it's a minute that he's not spent on promoting Scotland's own interests and particularly independence. So I think that this is a very bad episode in Scottish political life, because if you speak to the man or woman in the street, they have many differing views about the war in Ukraine, and you cannot say that the people of Scotland as a whole support Ukraine. What you can say is the people of Scotland as a whole want to see peace.
Yes.
But the people of Scotland also want to see prosperity in Scotland. And apparently the amount of money that's been pledged thus far by Britain to Ukraine is of the order of 12.5 billion. 7.5 billion is on military and 5 billion non-military support. That's a hell of an amount of money for Britain to be handing over by way of a gift, as you said earlier, when you look at the domestic circumstances of many of our people. Were Scotland independent, we would not be chuntering on here every week. We wouldn't be talking about people that have to worry and choose between eating and heating. We wouldn't be talking about working poor. We would not have to be in a position where so many of our people actually qualify for a council tax rebate because their wages are so low. We would not have a two-child rape clause. I mean, the SNP are still talking in terms of how they're going to be able to remove that, but they've not actually worked out the method to do it yet. But they know that calculating the method is going to cost them £15 million. This is the sort of stuff that's just utter nonsense. And our country deserves better. Our people deserve better. So I would strongly suggest that it would be sensible for John Swinney and Stephen Gethins, who made a speech tonight, he did a press release tonight supporting Zelensky and referring to Zelensky's personal courage and fortitude and words of that type. It would be better for them to actually get the ear to the ground as far as the people of Scotland are concerned, not in relation to international affairs, but in respect to domestic affairs, and start to create a plan for independence. That was what they were elected to do. If they don't do it, sooner or later, their jackets will be on a shaky nail. And, the people will eventually speak, perhaps not as quickly as we would like, but it will come.
Yeah, because here's the thing. There's a lot of people, I get attacked all the time, as you know, Phil, for, saying, oh, you're pro-Putin, you're pro-Russia. No, I'm not. I'm anti-war. You don't get that. And I'm telling the truth. And a lot of people don't like the truth. When you give them the truth, they don't want to hear it. They say, oh, no, he just invaded in February 22 for no reason. Really? It's an illegal invasion, yeah. We don't want to talk about the Maidan coup, etc., etc. But here is what you people who support Ukraine, and this was taken very recently. That's all Nazi chants, pictures of Nazi SS on their banners. These are people who name streets and statues and squares after Bandera and other Nazis and fascists. That's what you're supporting when you're supporting Ukraine. I'm with Eva and everyone else. I support peace. I want to see this ceasefire yesterday. I want the killing to end. But whatever happens, I do not support a fascist regime, Phil.
No, and we've been saying it for some time, and there's a lot out there now. The word is getting out, and as we mentioned earlier, just look at don't go mainstream media. Mainstream media just regurgitates exactly what your masters want you to hear, and if you're only looking there, and it's like, and don't take my word for it, don't take our word for it. Just look at different sources, consider different opinions, and you're not going to get it from the mainstream media. It's all the same. I had a friend argue, well, I read the broadsheets and I read the red tops. It's the same owner with the same message. You're just using more syllables in one of them. Most of the words, it's the same bloody message. So unless you're actually out there looking at some of the alternative media, the grey zone, and the people who are actually risking. Look what happened to when you do speak the truth. There's many brave people, many brave journalists being killed for telling the truth, targeted by the Israelis, targeted by the Ukrainians. Look at targeted by the West. Look what happened to Assange. You know. It's appalling the fact that we can't speak the truth. What we once stood for was proud and true, and it was speaking the truth and standing up for doing what's right, changing laws that were wrong, and putting laws in place to create a fairer and more civilized society. That the West has completely lost that, and what's coming down the turnpike is horrific. It's really very, very unpleasant, and God protect us for what's coming down the tube, because it's going to get very, very bad. And supporting Nazis and spending money on bombs instead of bairns is totally the wrong way to do it, and we all know that.
Yeah. The one thing that one of the reasons that attracted me to the SNP and the independence movement in the first place, Alan, was they were neutral. We were against all wars and all conflicts. And Alec Salmon, God rest him, when they were bombing Serbia, and he was right, unpardonable folly, which it was. We've opposed every war, Libya, the lot, Vietnam, every war we've opposed till Sturgeon came along, and she was the first one to send support to Ukraine, to the fascists, and we were supporting a side. And whether you agree with which side or other, we shouldn't be supporting it. I would rather see us having taken Ireland's point of view and being a neutral country.
If you're ever going to fight in a war, then it has to be against the fascists, not for them. Oh, but remember an old song, War, what is it good for? Well, it's good for hiding domestic issues. That's what it's good for. Deflecting away from our own government's inadequacies. I just got my fuel bill in for the last month. And because I have 2 hoists, 2 feeding pumps, a suction machine, an oxygen machine, my bill was just over £500 for a month. Now that's after Labour promising to bring them down. But people are not seeing that because they're concentrating so much on international issues, like some of them giving £3 billion because the Ukrainians really, really need this. No, they don't. They need peace. Mm-hmm. We almost had peace until Boris Johnson went over there on the instructions of the West and scuppered that peace. Let's never forget who extended this war a lot longer than it should have been going on. We should have peace, and that's what every single political leader should be pushing forward to. Stop the funding of bombs. Start feeding your own kids. Start heating your own pensioners. We don't need wars in this world. We need peace.
We do. We do indeed. Well said, Alan. And just remember that, folks. 12 billion has gone since July of last year to Ukraine. No money for you to save the jobs in Grangemouth and the community. No money for the WASPy women. No money to give a decent pension. No money to give the pensioners the winter fuel allowance. But money to pay for killing. Not in my name. I hope you and yours are well till we see you again. Until then, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.